Hey everybody, welcome to the program WRSA Radio. I'm your host G1. As always, I hope you're having a good week. I've been busy over the last week or so. As you know, I missed putting out an episode last week due to actually working at a real job. Extra days last week at my part-time job. A lot of paperwork that we were dealing with. That I had to get caught up. So they asked me to come in for a few more extra days last week, and it just didn't let me put a show together. But I think it's okay, and I think you guys understand. My longtime listeners know what I've been dealing with on the job front. Anyway, this week we have a lot of potential topics to talk about, so I kind of had a decision to make, about what to cover. So I didn't really think I had great takes on a lot of the things, and didn't really think that I could offer much on a few topics. But I did want to go over the ICE actions, or the anti-ICE actions, and the goings on over the last two weeks or so. But before I get into that, I do have a little bit to talk about what happened in Australia this week, because some of you might not have been following that, and I wanted to kind of bring that to your attention. Know this about the anti-free speech legislation that passed in Australia. It passed with overwhelming government support, and it's already having an impact. I don't know, they already had some fairly tough laws against free speech there in Australia, but I think this new legislation and the things that have happened there, the position and the stance that their government has taken, has caused some, well, you might call it overreaction from their law enforcement. This week, a mentally disabled woman was arrested for making an accidental butt dial on her cell phone to a woman that she had texted earlier in the day. Now, the woman who was called is Jewish, and she owns a business. And the disabled woman texted her some questions about this business, like wanting to come to her as a customer. And then a short while later, she says she accidentally butt dialed this woman on her phone, didn't mean to. No words were spoken. Nothing was said. Sounds very clear to me that this was an accidental call. But the woman reported to police that she heard, there were sounds that sounded like gunshots. And so she took this call as somehow being an anti-Semitic death threat. And so the police responded and arrested this disabled woman. So bottom line is, a Jewish woman got offended, so somebody had to be arrested. Now, this is preposterous. It's just asinine. It's egregious. You run out of adjectives to kind of describe this. But it happened, and it will ramp up, and it will get worse in Australia under this new legislation that is passed there, because that gives them even more power. One has to wonder if they're trying to turn the whole country back into a penal colony. If you don't really understand what I'm talking about, in the wake of the Bondi or tax, the Australian Parliament has passed this draconian free speech law that targets specifically anti-Semitism and also anti-Islamic speech. But it doesn't say anything about anti-Christianity speech, by the way. That's perfectly fine. But the even worse part of this is that there's no specific definition of what constitutes anti-whatever speech. It's just left up to government agents to determine based off of who was offended, as we see in this example here. And if you think that can't happen here, you're mistaken. It's only a matter of time before we see people really pushing for this kind of legislation to actually hit the books, actual written down legislation. We're already seeing people talk about it. So just mark my words, this will come to the United States. I don't believe it will pass court muster, but that doesn't mean it's not going to go on the books somewhere until somebody challenges it. We already have some laws similar to that in Florida, for example. Semper vigilans, as they say. Now let's get to the ICE protesters and talk about really the last week, particularly over the weekend, what occurred. Because this week we've seen the wheels come completely off of the wagon. I witnessed, and many of you may have witnessed this if you watched the videos, maybe even you saw it live stream as it happened. I witnessed something that was completely insane. I watched the videos of what happened to internet personality Jake Lang this weekend in Minneapolis. I don't know much about Jake Lang. I know he's a provocateur and outspoken voice. He's professed to be right-wing or conservative, whatnot. I'm sure he's said things that I would not agree with, and probably things that I would agree with, but I've paid very little attention to him and have really only seen him on some live streams at protests that have taken place in the past. He's been at some of them and been on other streamers' cameras, as he did things. And he's provocative. I have seen him kind of get in the face of these protesters and, instigate things with them. He may be a complete douchebag for all that I know. But none of that really matters, okay? None of that matters. It doesn't really make a difference in the context of what happened. This guy was out on the street on Saturday attending one of these anti-ICE protests, and he didn't instigate anything. He didn't antagonize people other than just his mere presence caused them great anguish and upset. And they mobbed him. And so he decided to leave. Before things really, really got out of hand, he's leaving, and he has a little small entourage of people with him, and they start to leave. He was assaulted multiple times. So he kind of sped up his movement there. And rather than let him leave, the mob followed him and his group of people. And they continued to assault him. And it was at this point someone attempted to stab him, and he was hit on the head with a flagpole. Because he was wearing body armor, the stab didn't cause any serious injury, but the flagpole gashed his head open pretty bad, and he was bleeding significantly, enough that he had to go to the hospital to receive treatment for this. But that was not enough. The mob continued to follow him all the way through the lobby of a hotel. Blocks down the street, several blocks down the street, they followed him. The only way that he really got away was when he went into this hotel and his group went into the hotel. They were a small enough group of people that they could get through the door fairly quickly, but the mob was trying to go through all at once, and only a small number of them were able to kind of filter through. So he was able to make room and get away. They lost track of him as he went into this parking garage. So they weren't staying at the hotel. What it looked to me that they had done was they had used the parking garage from this hotel as a place to kind of stage from, and then they had walked through that lobby from the parking deck out onto the street. And so they were fleeing back to there. And they lost track of him, and he managed to get in his car with this small group of people, 3 or 4 individuals, and they got away. Well, they get out onto the street, and the mob continues to pour out into the street, and they catch up to the car at a traffic light. They try to pull him out of the vehicle to continue to go after him. And it was only the car, speeding away, pulling out of there, that he was able to escape. But the mob wasn't done. they turned their attention onto random people and began assaulting them. Anyone who looked like they possibly could be a supporter of ICE or a supporter of Jake Lang, well, they were accosted. And in at least one case, a guy who was actually part of the mob was attacked. He was one of them. But because he was white and he had on a hunting jacket, camouflage, real tree hunting jacket, which those are pretty thick on the ground in Minnesota, well, they mistook him for the enemy and they beat him up until somebody else come up and said, no, he's one of us, he's one of us. And somebody screamed, well, how are we supposed to know? Well, duh. Yeah, exactly. That's the whole point, dumbass. Now, this was really kind of a flashback to the 2020 election for me, when I remember seeing Trump supporters being attacked while they were leaving campaign rallies. There are 2 or 3 individuals who were mobbed by several dozen people and hounded and followed to their vehicle and attacked all along the way. That was the last time I had seen something like that. I recall a guy in a Spartan costume who was being pursued by a very large mob, by like 100 people. And he was not stopping to try to fight or anything like that because he had his kid with him. That was a very harrowing moment. You know, this is a guy that maybe was carrying a weapon that he could have stopped and said, no, I'm taking some of you out with me. But he didn't do that because he had his kid with him and he was trying to get away. It kind of evoked the same kind of thing as seeing that did for me. And nothing happened to any of these people, by the way. No law enforcement action has taken place against them. There's no indication that there will be. There was no public statements by Minneapolis law enforcement that said this is unacceptable behavior. This is not going to be accepted. We're going to take action. We're identifying people. We're investigating. There will be arrest. None of that took place. None of that will take place. All of these people are on camera inflicting assaults on this guy, and nothing is going to happen. And they're attacking him just because of who he is, saying that they don't want him here. You don't belong here, so you have to leave, and if you don't leave, we're going to enact violence on you. It's kind of ironic if you think about it. And I believe that lack of law enforcement action emboldened these protesters, and that was directly what led to what I'm calling an atrocity a few days later at the Baptist Church. I'm sure that you've seen the video and are aware of Don Lemon and his flash mob storming into a church service, verbally attacking the members of the church, all on video. Again, this is horrid, unacceptable behavior. And they did this because they said the pastor of the church is, for his day job, he's an ICE field manager or some kind of ICE employee. And Don Lemon had the audacity to claim that their protest was protected by the First Amendment. No, sir. No, sir, it is not. Not in this case. Had you stayed out on the sidewalk on public property, sure, you would be protected and you'd be allowed to protest. But you crossed the line when you went into the church, and that church is private property. And it's all on video. The pastor repeatedly told you and your mob that you were trespassing and that you need to leave. You broke the law, sir. It's appalling actions. Well, today things may have changed a little bit, in this incident at least, to some extent. Pam Bondi has actually gotten off of her useless ass and done something. Charges are being filed and arrests are being made. Now, I have not seen any indication yet, may have been maybe posted as of right now as I'm recording this video, but I haven't seen anything yet that says Don Lemon will be arrested. because he did, in fact, enter the church after the mob was already inside. He did not actually lead this mob. He came in afterwards. He was there. He says, he claims he was covering the mob outside, and then they went inside the church, and then he went in. And that is on video. That is what happened. But we don't know what happened beforehand, before cameras started rolling, before anybody really could tell what they were organizing. You know, we don't know what was said. He just claims he was reporting these activities. So that might be something that Pam Bondi is kind of too afraid to try and contest, because he is press. He does have a YouTube channel or some type of program that he streams or what have you. But nonetheless, the other organizers and members of this mob are being arrested and charged on federal civil rights violations. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of spins off from that. Now, yesterday, moving on to other things, yesterday we once again saw Border Patrol Chief Greg Bovino, heading out on operations in Minneapolis and being attacked by protesters. Every time they tried to stop at a gas station, these guys were just trying to go to the bathroom, and every time they would stop at a gas station, this mob would assemble on them. And at one point it got so bad that the protesters were blocking them from leaving the station. So here's the gymnastics of the left. They're screaming to get out of our neighborhood, leave, but then they won't let them leave. So it got so bad that the agents tossed out tear gas into the crowd, and that was the only thing that broke them up, and they were able to leave. And this is the latest in a string of actions as various and sundry rejects head out onto the streets because they think that they are some kind of superheroes and that they're doing this job of fighting for truth and justice. And in actuality, they're obstructing legal law enforcement, real justice. And I wonder how much the left would be supporting this if this was the actions of, I don't know, right-wing gun owners who were following around and obstructing the ATF from doing their job. Think that they'd be totally okay with that? No. Now, speaking of guns, this last weekend we really saw for the first time, at least in this latest hoo-ha, the first cases of insane leftists taking to the streets with firearms. Now, they've done this before, but I think we're going to start seeing more and more of this. They were professing that they would be standing up to ICE. It's one thing for them to come out as they have in the past and say, we're going to stand up to MAGA people and Trump people. It's another thing to say that you are going to oppose federal agents. That's a whole different line. It's a whole different calculus. So this was an escalation that you might have missed because many people kind of descended into this purity spiral about their choice of firearms and how they accessorize themselves and just completely, as usual, missed the greater impact of this moment. While you were maybe sitting around this week watching videos from the SHOT Show on the latest, tactical guns and gadgets and all that cool stuff, these people are putting armed forces into the streets. Now, it's just a little bit for now. Like I said, it's kind of dipping their toes in to kind of gauge the response and see if the government is going to push back or what it's going to do. But guess what? So far, no one did anything about it. No one has said anything. And I believe this is going to ramp up, and you're going to see more and more people at these incidents armed. It won't be all of them, but I think in these little mob groups, these quick response units that they've put together, one or two people are going to be armed visibly, and these confrontations, they're going to have a handful of people with pistols and rifles under the belief that just the presence of those firearms will somehow deter ICE from enforcing the law. And they think They're going to be able to keep ICE from shooting another bored housewife who tries to ram them with her car. This has the potential to spark a much bigger fire. So put down the donut and listen up. They have a communication network. They have command and control. They have intelligence gathering. They have significant funding from the Tides Foundation, which uses federal grant money and George Soros money to fund these networks and pay these protesters. They have numbers. And now, they're starting to arm themselves and get out on the street. What do you think this is? What do you think it looks like? Now, this is bigger than George Floyd, by the way. This is way more controlled and way more targeted and organized. And in all honesty, it's way more accessible for the broader people. More people will get on board with this. More people will be in support of this than the BLM movement because of how destructive the BLM movement was. This isn't like that. They're not out burning down buildings and destroying businesses and all that. This is way more acceptable for the average leftist and honestly the average middle of the road American. People who say, well, I don't really like the idea of masked agents out on the street, so that kind of looks like overreach to me. Well, maybe I should be on their side. This is way more accepting to them. They genuinely believe that they are fighting evil, and they believe that you and I are part of that evil simply because we want to have a nation of our own that we keep people of different cultures to a small, manageable percentage of. For that, we're evil. So get off your ass and get training, because the clock is ticking and you're really far behind. It's dangerous to go at this alone. Do you think you could take on a mob out there in the street by yourself, or even with 2 or 3 of your guys? No, you couldn't. You better know how to deal with those kind of things. That's all the time I have for this week. Like and subscribe. Come see us over on Gab, Nice Crew, and the Mothership. And I'll see you on the next episode.